All right. Well, now we have something really special. I had the privilege of talking to Russell Stewart, who is an author. We are featuring him in our upcoming magazine, July issue, which will be out probably this coming week. Russell wrote a book called An Idiotic Savant, and it really, I don't know how it brought me into a new realm of syndromes that I had not been experienced with. And of course, when I talked with him on the phone, I would not know that Russell was any different than any of us. But I'm going to let him talk to us. I have a lot of things that we're going to ask him. So the first one, good morning, by the way. Good morning, Russell. I know you're there and you're calling in from Connecticut, right?
Yes, good morning. I'm delighted to talk to you, and I enjoyed the ending of the previous Doctor.
Right, Doctor, right.
It's a very enlightening.
Yeah, you would have liked our interview at 5 o'clock was from a celebrity writer in New York, and he writes in the magazine, and he calls in from Staten Island, and we talked about Marilyn Monroe and Jackie Kennedy. You would have liked that one, too.
Well, that's marvelous.
But let me ask you a question. Why did you name the book An Idiotic Savant?
Well, I thought about it a lot, but I wanted to name it what was after me was really true, and my whole life has been idiotic in that I wasn't afraid of dying because it didn't bother me, and I didn't, believe it or not, didn't have any pain. When I was hit by a car on a bike and broke my leg, it didn't hurt at all. When I stepped on a piece of wood driven up my leg 18 inches, I didn't notice it. There was no pain. And until I saw blood all over my shoes. And so I went to the hospital driving with one foot, and there was. It was just, I explained to the doctor I didn't have any pain, didn't know what it was going about. Could he stop the bleeding? So we did. So
well, maybe what we have to, yeah,
it's a strange thing that I live with.
That's right. So maybe we need to go back and talk about what it is that you have that many of us don't have, and it's called Aspergers Syndrome. And just why don't you share that, and then we can move on with some of the other things.
Sure. Aspergers Syndrome wasn't discovered, or really wasn't named until Dr. Asperger gave a name to it in the 40s. So when I was diagnosed by a psychologist as a child, they just told me that I didn't talk to people or look them in the eye because of my overwhelming fear of what was going on in my life as a child. My father was a drunkard, and my mother was often away, and he didn't come to the hospital when she was there, and she was angry about that. She didn't want children. And so the doctor explained that I must have felt guilty because I didn't talk to anybody. And so I spent my life, traveling and doing stuff that was, in many cases, pretty silly. But it led to adventures that I'm happy that I had, even though I often had trouble dealing with people, was often fired from a company because I used to go into rages, like a lot of people who have handicaps. They hold their emotions back until they burst out, and then they tell their boss the boss is all wrong. And the next day they're out of work. So it has some weaknesses, but it has some adventures too.
Well, I think what I'd like to tell our listeners is that actually you have been very, very successful, and you graduated from Princeton University with honors in psychology. You've spent summers working with people who are blind and physically handicapped. You were in the Navy as an officer. And so, you've really had quite a life. And here it is. This is your first book. We're very proud to be able to have it in our magazine. And I read this and I said, oh, my goodness, you really have had some life. But you have this great attitude, and it doesn't seem to have affected you, at least on the outside. We don't see that. Maybe on the inside you are emotionally still very sensitive.
Well, let me tell you about it. Some of the problems, like bipolar syndrome, do not go away for the rest of your life. But in the case of Asperger's syndrome, what I found is that as you mature and get older, I'm talking about in the 60s or 70s, a lot of those problems go away. You do contact people, you do look them in the eye. It's easy to talk with people, especially you, Anita. It's a pleasure to talk, and so most people don't believe that I ever had it, but I did for a number of years because I had some, did some strange things, and I have some strange things to tell you about, which I can describe now if you like.
Yes, please.
Well, one of the things the most, to me, one of the most unusual things is that I got a PIN number with my credit card a few weeks ago. It's only 4 numbers, and I spent 2 weeks, and I could not remember them. If I put the card down and put it away for an hour, I couldn't remember it. And to this day, I couldn't remember 4 numbers, or 5, or even 8, or a phone number. If I see a movie the night before, I have to ask my wife, what movie did we see? So I still have this memory problem. On the other hand, I was retained to develop a mathematical formula for an airlines, and which I successfully did. And they paid $1 million for the answer, which their accounting department had been looking for years and years, and they hadn't figured out how to do the answer for their frequent flyers program. So I did it, wrote it. We went down to Dallas, met with the powers that be. I presented my algorithm, and they said, we'll have a check for you in an hour. And we walked out with $1 million and went to the local cafe at the airport and sat there drinking champagne. And then we flew off to London, where the couple that actually had the idea bought a castle for their money and had a good time. And I was paid my $40,000 because I was just paid for the time I spent working on it. But it was one more of my adventures.
Well, this is and is this part of the syndrome that you can't remember those numbers that easily? I tend to have that little problem too. I was thinking about that. If I really start focusing in, but I always keep numbers in my address book because there are times that I can't remember them.
Well, let me say that mine is probably worse than most people. But it's improving. It's improving slowly. Some of the Asperger syndromes. There's one particular man who wrote a book, who's the leading Asperger syndrome in the world, and he can, I think, quote 20,000 digits of the number pi. He can learn a language in 5 days, speak it perfectly with the right accent. And I know one of the idiotic geniuses, which as a matter of fact I had dinner with 2 weeks ago, who knows 8,000 pieces of music and plays 17 instruments, but he has an intelligence of a 12-year-old. So this particular problem is wide-ranging and varies by the individual. So it's not a clear-cut thing. They just named it. Dr. Oliver Sacks named it after he discovered, he didn't name it, but he actually talked a lot about it and described it. And I didn't know I was different than other people until I was 40 years old. I just knew that I thought everybody else in the world was strange, and I was the only regular guy.
I love that. Talk about self-confidence. This is Russell O. Stewart, and he wrote a book, An Idiotic Savant, and it's quite a challenging book. In order for me to do this properly, I had to do some research on savants, the syndrome, and really learned a lot about this. And so you are prodigious. I mean, you really are a genius in many ways. And even though, you talk about being, having some difficulties, you have really surpassed anything that anyone would have believed. I mean, how did you decide you were going to invent a multi-bladed razor, for example?
Well, I'd be delighted to tell you the story because I didn't believe it at the time, I was hired at the Gillette Company to be management of their most successful razor blade, which was the stainless steel blades. And I was happy with the job. It was making money. I was doing well at it. The company liked me, and it was just great. And then Wilkinson Sword came out from an English razor, and they had a razor that was better than ours. And the vice chairman of the board called me and said, we're going to lose $1 billion to our stock. If the people find out that we don't make the best blade, our stockholders are going to lose billions, and our people who are on pension plans, they're going to lose their pension. It's going to be horrible. You have to, you've got to figure out how to make a better product than anybody else in the world. And they said, you are discharged for your current job. We're going to give it to someone else. We put it in good hands, and you're free to go and develop a product that's better than anybody else. I was so frightened I didn't know what to do next, but I said, well, let me travel the world, and I'll visit with people, and I'll go to all the Gillette factories in the world and find out if anybody has any ideas. So I telephoned people, and no, we don't have any products like that. We didn't spend any time doing new products. We don't know about that. But I went to the first laboratory in Reading, England, where we not only had a Gillette company, but we had a little company in Reading that made dermatones. And dermatones are a medical instrument to remove the first layer of flesh from your skin, and they put it where you've been burned, and it grows again, and it's not rejected by the body. So I talked to the director there, and I said, well, tell me about this thing that you have. Show it to me. So he showed it me in what's called photomicroscopy. He actually put it on a screen enlarged so you could see the hair, and he was cutting the hair, but with two blades. And he said, if you miss the hair with the first blade, the second blade cuts it off because the hair doesn't jump back. It's pulled out a little bit by the first blade. Oh, I said, that's marvelous. That's called hysteresis, and it's true of all your muscles. If you pull them out, it takes them 100th of a second, a couple hundredths of a second to go back to where they belong. So I said, well, this is marvelous. If the first blade doesn't get it, the next one will. So I flew back to the U.S., and I explained it to the company, and they all voted down. They said, well, it's going to be too expensive to do this. We can't align two blades within a thousandth of an inch and put it in plastic and all that stuff. And it's going to be too expensive to sell. It'll take us years to do it. All the vice presidents voted against it. So at night, I worked with a couple of the guys from the development department, and I said, don't put it in your log because we're not allowed to spend any money on it. But for fun, let's just make a sample. Just let's do it as a fun project. And they did. And they made a fun project. And I called this guy who hired me, and I said, I have this thing. Can I come over and tell you about it over dinner? He invited me to his fancy club and all that stuff. And I gave it to him and showed it to him and wrapped it in a napkin. And he picked up the phone. He called the chairman of the board. And he said to the chairman of the Gillette, now this is a guy who's got a private airplane, private doctors. He's running, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars worth of responsibility. And he said, don't take your breakfast and don't shave. I'll be right there in the morning. So they got together and had breakfast and coffee, and then they went to the toilet, and the two men there set their time shaving. Well, that was at 7:00. By noon, I had $10 million to not only develop the product, but build a small factory that could make it. And then they gave me the responsibility to administer it, write the advertising, do the publicity. And the end of the story is, the funniest part is that they're so valuable when we're manufacturing. I asked, could I have some for myself? And they said, no, it's on strict control. You can't have any. So I couldn't have any until it went into the stores, and I had to buy it myself. So that's that story.
That's quite a story. And so did they reward you well?
No, I quit the company at about a year later because I didn't get a raise for 3 years. The inflation was going, I think, 10, 12%. So I was making about 30% less than when I joined the company. So I left the company and joined a high-risk company, which was probably a mistake, but I just felt mistreated, so I was a little bit angry about it, and left for another company, which, believe it or not, was making had slaughterhouses, was selling bacon and meat, but they were willing to pay me 50% more, and that's what I did.
Well, you are, the other thing, and I don't know, I mean, we can talk about it because it was very impressive that you're so charming that you had a lot of women in your life. You like women, don't you? Well,
I certainly do. Well, I think all men, think about that more than anything else. As a matter of fact, they asked men and women how often they think about it, and I think the average man thinks about it about 8 times a day.
And it doesn't change as they get older.
And you're a young man, and you're in pretty good shape, and you're in the service, and you're in Europe, and everybody liked the Americans. Oh, the Germans loved us for, even though we beat them up in the war, we treated them well afterward, and the Italians liked us, and the French particularly liked us because we had freed France for the war. So wherever I went, I was invited to their homes. I was invited when I was landed in Frankfurt, Germany. I asked them where I could stay, and they said, "Don't worry about it. Come stay with us," which I did. And most places, I was driving in Paris, and I banged someone's car because I was looking at the Tour Eiffel, and they got out, and they said, "What happened?" I said, "Well, I wasn't looking where I was going." Oh, they said, "Don't worry about it. Come stay with us, and we'll help get your car fixed." So,
oh my goodness!
So I wherever I went, I met people, and often I met people who were traveling too, and when the women were traveling, like an airline stewardess or someone on vacation, they are not worried about it getting back home that they spent the night with some stranger, and so I would be the stranger. So the word never got back, and I wasn't with anybody who was married, but that way they felt free to have an adventure or share an adventure. And when we were in the service, when I was reporting to a 3-star admiral, we would have cocktail parties at each of the ports as a NATO individual and part of the NATO services. And wherever we went, we would stop and have the decks all cleaned up and have a party. And no alcohol, of course, but people were invited to look at the ship. And often I would be invited back. I remember one time I was invited back by a Contessa in Venice to visit her at her home, and I did. And I was amazed because their first floor was flooded as Venice is having its problems. And they were living only upstairs, and I didn't know about it at the time. But because he was royalty, he was given a stipend to live there, and his home was free, and so they stayed there. And he'd never been educated or knew how to work, so they lived there happily. But as noted royalty, and so I was invited there, and I'll tell you quickly, one of the adventures I had is I was invited to a dinner party for Princess Grace's table in Monte Carlo, for New Year's Eve. So I got dressed up and drove over to Monaco, parked my car, went to the dinner party, and there at the dinner party there wasn't Princess Grace. I found that she decided to stay at her home in the north, and had the nanny for the children as my date for the evening. So I sat down, and we had a lovely time and danced and drank champagne, and there was two another couples there. And then after the party, the balloons go down, and this music stops, and it's New Year's Eve, and the party's over. And the waiter comes over and hands me a check, a bill. And it was a bill more than I could save in 3 or 4 months, and I had enough money to pay for my car and parking and my gas. I couldn't pay the bill. And I looked so floored that the chap next to me said, "Oh, that's okay. We'll cover it for you." Well, it turns out that he was a multimillionaire who made his money in oil, and for him it was just about the size of a tip, so it didn't bother him. But those are the kinds of strange things that I ran into in my life.
Well, let me ask you a question. I mean, I've really enjoyed this. Would you describe yourself? How tall are you?
At the time I was 6'1" and weighed about 165, something like that. But I was had the record for the number of chins when I was in high school, and my uncle was a rowing champion of the United States and number 2 in the world, and I was sort of built like he was, and I didn't do bodybuilding, but one of the advantages I have in having gone to Hong Kong for visits for the Navy, my suits were all tailored, and so I look like a lot of the movie stars do, where their suits are $1,100, and today they're $2,000 or $3,000 to have them fit perfectly. And if you don't eat a lot, then you look pretty good. And so I was pretty I was awfully successful, more successful than I ever imagined, because I, being shy as I was with my syndrome, I never accosted a woman or asked a woman to do anything personal or relationships. I was often approached by a woman at a cocktail party, or when I went to, let's say, a new city like Istanbul, I would go to the nicest hotel and have dinner just to get away from the ship. And so in this case, I was asked if I would have a cup of coffee with this lovely young lady. I said, sure. So I had coffee, and then she said, well, why don't we have coffee in my room?
Of course.
And I didn't know what, I said, well, yeah, okay. I mean, I didn't mind a second cup of coffee. I never had that before, but I remember to this day walking down the carpet towards her room like a puppy dog. I mean, I don't know what we were going to do there. Watch TV. So I go into the room and she closes the door. She takes her clothes off. Then she patted the bed like I was a puppy dog. Get up on the bed. So I did. I mean, I'm telling you, I was astounded, but I'm a man, so I went to bed. So that's the kind of thing that happened, and I think that's when I tell the story in the book. A lot of people read about it and say, "Gee, this is really something unusual." But a lot of the women are taken aback by it. Let me put it that way. They're less comfortable with it than the men are. The men just enjoyed the book no end.
Well, let me just say, of course, but let me just, I've been looking through your book, and I have to say that one thing that you have a very analytical mind, and through a lot of this, you were able to, even that hotel that you went, people hire you to review situations that they're having, and there's something in your mind, and is that part of the savant syndrome that you can see things? You said you can't remember things maybe, all the time, but is it that your mind just hooks onto something and that you can see it so clearly and it works so like a computer?
Well, it did with my clients, and I never lost a client once I'd met them, and it was a strange start because I was working for a consulting company as a consultant to the company as an analyst about companies' problems, and it was just everyday stuff. And I was invited to a meeting by owners of a hotel, and they had retained or at least asked experts to come and talk to them about how to handle a hotel, how to save a hotel. They had a hotel that was lovely, but it was losing money. It couldn't pay their taxes, and they couldn't pay their mortgage. And so I said to them, well, I've just been to a hotel as a client. I visit them, but I don't know them. And he said, well, when we talk to them, the experts, they tell us we have to change our uniform. We have to change our seating. We should upgrade our food. We should paint the front door. change the silverware, all that stuff. And I said, well, those are very minor things. I'll tell you what I will do, and you don't have to pay me except for a month's work. I'll tell you what, I'll contact 1,500 people. 500 came to your hotel and never came back. Those people weren't happy. And I'll call 500 people that came to your hotel and stayed. The next visit they came was in New Orleans. And the third people I'll call are people who never went to your hotel. And I use a service which is no longer allowed, to call people at random on the phone, 1,500 people. It was $5 a call. And I got the answers. The answers were that the hotel was great, the service was great, the people were great, but it was so far from the French Quarter that people didn't want to hail a cab, which was hard to get. As a matter of fact, often they couldn't find a cab. They didn't want to walk a mile and a half, in the evening or at night to go to the French Quarter, and so it was too far away. So I said to them, well, why don't you have a little bus, give them a hurricane drink, have music, and leave promptly and take them to the French Quarter and bring them back. And the vast majority, 90% said, yes, it's great because the price is great, everything's perfect except we can't get... So the hotel went from 10% occupancy to number one in growth in New Orleans within 6 months. And they retained me for 4 years, checking their any problems, any consumer complaints we would review and correct. So I guess what my thinking does is I always think, and I do that at night, I go to bed thinking about the problems, and in the morning, I can't tell you how it happens, but in the morning, all of a sudden I have a plan. And it's the same thing that happened to me at college. I went to bed working on a problem I had for the next day in advanced physics, and got up and went to have the test, and they called me first. Wrote the answer on the board, and I wrote the 6 equations on the board, and they say, well, you couldn't guess on that, Russ, because it's a 9-digit answer and it's perfect, but we can't figure out what your logic was, and we can't figure out how you arrived at this with your calculus. And I said, I don't know either. It just came to my consciousness. So in many cases, I can't explain what happens. In all I know is that one of my hemispheres is larger than normal, and that it seems to be busy all the time.
Well, I usually I talk more with an interview, but I just can't interrupt you because it's great and we only have a minute left. But I have to say that for someone who didn't care if they lived or died because you had no family, no money, you really had a very, sad childhood in a way, you have certainly made it. You're a hero. You're doing great. And we'll have to have you on another time, Russell, because I've enjoyed this so much. I admire you, and sometimes you have to come down and review my company. I mean, I just think you've got it. I think I could line people up for you to come and see what we could do better. But if you ever want to come to South Florida, you let me know. But we'll be back to you, and we'll send you copies of the magazine with your book.
I'm sorry I may have talked too much.
No, you did not. Trust me. There are people I would not have let talk, but you certainly did a great job. I was mesmerized, and thank you so much. And we'll talk to you again, Russ.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was wonderful.